Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, August 21st around here, and we are about 3 days away from football happening, so a lot of juices are flowing, I'll just put it that way. But a ton to get to today. We're going to start talking about how I'm questioning just about every prediction I've made for the season, and I love it. I love that everything this season is so up in the air that I can't make a prediction without feeling fully confident in it. So I'll break down that a little bit, and we'll revisit some of my picks. Then we'll get into the realignment teams. It feels like a lot of these teams are being crowned in their new conference before they've even jumped in. And I think we might be underestimating some of the changes that they're going to have to deal with as they walk into the new their new conference. Then I want to get into what Colin Cowherd had to say about Oklahoma. Now, this happened quite a while ago, but it popped up on my feed a couple of days ago, and I had something to say about it, so I thought I'd get into it today. Then we have lingering questions around the rest of the top 25. We're going to roll through this through the rest of the week here. And then we have some fall camp intel to finish it off. A ton of new starting quarterbacks have been named across the country. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the super chat feature, the super thanks feature, super stickers, however you'd like to use it, to get on the screen to get a little bit more involved in the show. You'll see at the bottom of the chat, you'll have a little $sign there. You can click on that, leave any question, any comment you have, and you will absolutely pop up on the screen. It's a huge way to keep this thing interactive, and as the season's coming around, I very much want this show to be as much you guys as it is mine. So definitely want this to be very interactive for you all, and that's the best way to utilize it. If you don't want to utilize that, you're more than welcome to go to gsmcpodcast.net and leave a comment there. Same exact thing will happen. So either way is more than fine, but sometimes the super chat is just a little bit easier for you all that are on YouTube. But let's go ahead and jump in here, and let's talk about how I am questioning pretty much every pick that I made for 2024. And it's one of those things that usually you'd be worried. Usually, you'd be upset, you'd be mad. I am not at all. I actually love the fact that I'm sitting here right now saying I could rethink my SEC, my Big 10, my Big 12, my ACC, my Group of 5 team in the playoff. There are a million different things that I'm rethinking over the last couple of weeks since I've made those picks. Frankly, I think I made them just a touch too early. But at the end of the day, I have my picks. I'm not going to change those picks, but let's get into why I'm questioning them so aggressively and why it probably won't stop until those games happen. First, we'll start with each conference, just kind of break it down a little bit and how crazy it is going to be this upcoming year. Tennessee is coming into the SEC with just about as much hype as you've seen around them recently. They're a better team, especially defensively, than they were in 2022, and they did some really special things in 2022. Ole Miss is as hyped and talented as the Lane Kiffin has had there, and really could be the best team they've had since 1970 over in Oxford. When you talk about Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma, all coming off really big years and looking to parlay that into their new conference for Texas and OU, and Missouri just trying to keep the status quo in the SEC and stay at least relevant in this conference. And then you got Bama and Georgia that are always going to be there, and then add in A&M, add in Kentucky, add in a number of other teams that could definitely throw a wrench into this thing and makes this thing just remarkably questionable at best. Then we'll get into the Big Ten. This is one of those conferences that seems a little bit more straightforward, but man, there's still a ton of hurdles. Ohio State is one of the single most talented teams that I've seen in quite some time. Michigan is coming off a title and a scandal from a year ago, so plenty of eyes on them. Penn State is one of those teams that there is an opening now. The 12-team playoff opens a door for a team like Penn State to get in. But the question is, can they get there? A ton of pressure on them to get to that playoff this year. USC and Oregon are coming in thinking they can compete right away, especially Oregon, and I don't necessarily argue with them too much. And then Nebraska could just be back this year, which would be something to watch, that is for sure. Moving on to the Big 12, Utah comes in as the favorite, and with a healthy Cam Rising, it's hard for me to argue with that. But now that he's fully healthy, it feels like this is the team that is leading the way heading into this year. Kansas State has a quarterback that was so good that the starter over at Ohio State was essentially kicked out the door. So gives you an idea of how talented that kid is. Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and a number of other teams return ridiculous amounts of production. Colorado is the ultimate chaos team in the entire country. We all know that. They can do some things this year that would not only turn the Big 12 on its head, the college football world on its its head, but also pretty much every casual fan would have to delete a couple of tweets about Deion Sanders. But at the end of the day, it is going to be incredible in that conference. That's why it's probably my favorite conference, at least Power 4 conference going into this year. The ACC championship is going to be a very interesting one because Miami is finally riding in on the hype train and have a ton of really, really good players to go along with it. Might be the most talented roster in the ACC right now with Cam Ward at the helm. Florida State is coming off the best year they've had in quite some time and got snubbed a little bit, so maybe that adds a little bit of energy. Maybe it takes away from some of the early games that they have. Clemson has been fading a little bit, but it leaves some room for chaos, and they seem to be right back where they want to be, so maybe they're right back towards the top of the ACC this year. NC State comes in with a ton of hype with all the transfers they brought in. Virginia Tech returns a ton of talent. SMU coming in just adds a little bit more chaos to the conversation. And then you had teams like Georgia Tech, UNC, Syracuse that aren't going to compete for this conference, but absolutely could screw it up for someone that is trying to compete for this conference. And then you move on to the group of 5, and this might be the most variable just because of the amount of teams you have to worry about, where you have Liberty coming off an undefeated season, looking to repeat that this upcoming year. Boise State has one of the best running backs and outright players in the country in Ashton Jeanty. Memphis is a team that likely could compete in a Power 4 conference tomorrow if they really needed to. Tulane, App State, a number of other teams that absolutely will have something to say about that spot in the playoffs. So overall, there's not one conference, there's not one group that you can point to and say, I know what's going to happen. Conference USA actually is the conference that I can point to and say, if Liberty doesn't win that conference, I would be outright shocked. That is the only conference that I can say that with, whether it's the Mountain West. Boise State is the best team up there, but Colorado State's a really good team. There are a number of really good teams out there. UNLV played for the championship a year ago. There are a number of teams out there that could throw a wrench into that. Memphis is a really good team. Tulane is going to be right there, nipping at your heels. So is UTSA. So there's going to be hurdles for all of these teams. And frankly, I don't know who's going to come out of the group of 5 because there's so much variables that go into it. And Liberty could go undefeated and still not be the team that comes out of the group of 5. So that kind of adds to this. But moving on, let's get into my picks for this season and why I'm questioning them just a little bit. Not too much. I am sticking with these picks. I'm going to roll with these and take the lumps as they come, but let's get into this a little bit, and we'll start with my conference title picks, everyone that's looking for that bye in that college football playoff. And in the SEC, I went chalk. I have Georgia over Texas in that title game, and frankly, it makes sense on paper. There's no two ways about that, but when you look at Georgia's schedule, there are more questions than you want to have, especially given last couple of years where it's been a little bit more manageable. Now having 3 games on the road that pretty much anyone in the country would go 0-3 against, and Georgia has to go at least 1-2, 2-1 against, it's going to be really, really tough to pull this off. And then Texas entering the SEC is just the ultimate question mark. You know, you can never feel confident about Texas, even if they look incredible, which they do. On paper, it's a remarkably good team, but at the end of the day, they are walking into a conference that they're meeting a lot of teams that look a lot like them. So it is going to be a huge question of what that looks like going into this year and how Texas can kind of handle that. Over to the Big Ten, I went the exact same way. Ohio State over Oregon. This one I feel a little bit better about, but you talk about Penn State, a team that is sitting right there on the outside that is going to get their shot to get in a lot of these games. And if they only lose to Ohio State, it opens a door where Oregon's just got to drop one more game. Or, Michigan's just got to drop one more game for them to get into this picture. And then Oregon obviously is entering a whole new world when they walk into the Big Ten with the physicality and the gameplay, and we'll get into that actually in the next segment here, but that's obviously going to be a huge question. Ohio State, frankly, I'm having a hard time poking a hole in this one. Ohio State's a ridiculous team, and at least on paper, and so the question is, can they put it into action? As of right now, I feel very confident they can, but it could get a little sketchy, that's for sure. Moving over to the Big 12, this is when I got a little bit crazy. Kansas State, I have winning over Iowa State in this conference, and I really like both these teams, but there's a reality in the Big 12 where you can pick any 2 teams from that conference, and you will never feel confident in your pick. You could pick Utah against Kansas State, Utah against Oklahoma State against Kansas State. It doesn't matter. There's going to be teams in the back end of this conference that are going to cause problems for you, whether it is Iowa State or Kansas or Arizona or UCF or Colorado down the road. There are a million different teams that are going to throw a wrench into this. I don't know if it's going to be Kansas State or Iowa State that gets the wrench thrown in, but there's going to be teams up at the top that feel really confident about where they stand in Week 10 and don't feel very confident towards the end of the season. And then in the ACC, Miami over Virginia Tech. This is one that just not having Clemson and Florida State in that title game just looks weird overall. So that one I'm very, very skeptical of. I think Clemson is a team that I've gotten a little bit more started to like a little bit more as we get close to the season. Florida State kind of the same, still have my same worries about them, but I think Miami's going to be a really good team. I think Virginia Tech, I just love. They're one of the teams that I'm buying into right next to LSU, which is what we'll get to right now, which is my playoff predictions. And brace yourselves, because this one got a little bit weird when I was making these picks. So right now, I have 4 SEC teams in this thing, 3 Big Ten, 3 ACC teams, a Group of 5 rep, and your Big 12 champion. So a lot of people don't have 3 ACC teams, and it was a weird way how I got here. But first, let's start with the teams that just kind of have to get a little bit of explaining, I suppose, before we get into it. LSU is the one that obviously everyone's pointing to. They have a million different questions on the defensive side of the ball, and so do I, if I'm being totally honest. But at the end of the day, I am buying into the defensive staff changes making enough of a difference for them to make the plays they need to. Virginia Tech is a really fun and good team. They're not even the most top 3 talented team in their conference. So the question becomes, can they overplay what they're capable of and be able to knock off a Clemson or something like that? So it's going to be really, really tough to watch this team make it their way into the playoff, but I'm rolling with them. I very much like the Hokies, and I think they're going to find their way back up, at least into the conversation on a national stage. Tulane is the team that I like to make it from the Group of 5, and there's just so many variables in the Group of 5 race for anyone to feel great about who they picked. Boise State, it tends to be the going team that is being picked across the country. Memphis, another one, but as of right now, I think you could pick anyone in the Group of 5 and talk me into it likely. So definitely going to be something to watch. And then the big question mark is, how did Florida State get in? They are a 10-2 team, at least by my estimation. They're Notre Dame's a 10-2 team. I have a 9-3 Alabama and Tennessee team. How did they get in? Well, they beat Notre Dame, is at least the way that I had it when I was going through this. So that was an easy one. I do have them losing to SMU. That's also 10-2. So the question is, who would get in, SMU or Florida State? I tend to lean Florida State, but they would have that head-to-head loss. And then you have a 9-3 Bama or 9-3 Tennessee or a 9-3 Michigan that it could get a little bit of an interesting conversation, and that is a nightmare scenario for Noles fans. So overall, I think when you're looking at all of this stuff, and more than anything, the point being, this is what it's all about. I made all these picks, and I feel confident in them for the most part. I'm not sitting here saying I want to change every single pick and bounce around all year and make sure that I have the right ones at the end of the day, because I'd almost rather have all the wrong ones, because a lot of my picks were a little bit chalky. If it gets a little bit weird, I'm all on board for that. So overall, I think we talk about this sport, and one of the best things about it is the uncertainty. It's the craziness that can happen. It's the unknowns. It's all of it that can happen throughout the season. And this year is going to be just like that. And it might be more like that than past years. So maybe I did jump the gun just a little bit with my picks. Maybe I was a little bit early to the party with making my picks for this season, but I'm going to stick with them. Even if I don't necessarily love them right now, even if I'm going to question them throughout the season, that's what college football is about, and we're going to get plenty of that questioning this upcoming year. So cannot wait for that. It was one of those things that usually you'd be worried if you had a questioning all of your predictions for the season. I kind of love it, if I'm being totally honest, because then I just get to watch it all unfold in front of me. So if you're someone that is telling me you know exactly what's going to happen this year, you're either lying, or I'd love to hear what the lottery numbers are going to be next week, because you can read the future. So congratulations to you. But overall, this is going to be a crazy season, and even if I don't love my picks, I'm going to love this season all the same. So cannot wait for it to get underway. But let's take our first break here. And I kind of want to get into an interesting conversation. It feels like Oregon, Texas, Utah have kind of been crowned in their new conference. They're going to compete for the title. There's no doubt about it. I'm not sure that's the exact case, and I'll get into exactly why I mean that right after this, so stick with us.